Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first of what will be several opportunities for us to celebrate the 30th anniversary of EarthForce. I'm Vince Meldrum. I'm the president and CEO of EarthForce. I've been around almost all of the 30 years, I hate to admit, kind of on and off with the organization. But today we are launching a series of forums that we're going to have over the next several months, where we're going to talk to people who have worked with us in the past and young people in the next session, just to find out, what EarthForce is about and how it's operated in the past. So today we have a fantastic panel of people that have worked with us from all sides, from educators to partners, to intellectual partners, to the person that was there when we were first birthed, and on down. And I'm excited to hear this panel. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to step back and get out of the way and hand it off to John McFadden.
All right. Thanks, Vince. I'm super excited to be here. We do have a great panel. I'm just stoked that I was involved with EarthForce over the years. It's such a great organization, but let's get down to it. We got some great panelists. Sharon Sprague, from the Deputy Director of NOAA's Chesapeake Bay office. Yolanda Pender-Bey, who is a master educator in Chicago, Illinois. Brian Brady, the founder and president of Youth Engage Consulting. Tamar, Datan, who is the senior advisor at NPAG, and Martha Monroe from the University of Florida. So thank you guys so much for being here. I'm so excited to hear your experience with EarthForce. And if it's okay with y'all, let's just dive into some of these questions. The first one, how did you first get involved with EarthForce? I want to call on Tamar, if that's all right.
Thanks so much, John, and hello, everyone. Tamar, Datan, she, her pronouns. And I first got involved in EarthForce before it was a gleam in anyone's eye. I was at the Pew Charitable Trust, at the time located in Philadelphia, and we had a change in our investment portfolio that generated an increase in the grants budget of about $35 million in 1 year. And so we decided to call in a dream team and to try to figure out some special things to do with this money. And we got this idea incubated called Ecotopia, which was to be this environmental theme park. And we started doing research around that. And we stumbled upon, and this is in the early 90s, 30 years ago, we stumbled upon, 10 or 12 different organizations that were founded and led by youth and children and youth. And they were doing things like positive picketing places that were replacing styrofoam with paper and saying, shop here. And they were doing all kinds of things in their community. And we thought, well, gosh, this is where the action is. So we called in the children and youth to this big board table in Philadelphia. And they all came in and they sat around this big table with their parents. And we had this big discussion. We said, how can we help you? True story. The kids all said, you know what? This is great. Let's just form a big umbrella we can all get under together. And the parents all said, we could really use money for envelopes and stamps and, all of our, we decided to listen to the kids. And that's how EarthForce was formed. So we had, you'll be glad to know the biggest chunk of that $35 million, $12 million to found EarthForce 30 years ago. Wow. And I'm just delighted to be back here today and to see how far it's come.
What a unique story. From the beginning, it's driven by youth.
Exactly.
Shannon, how did you first get involved with EarthForce?
So I'm with NOAA, part of the NOAA BWET program, which is the Bay Education and Training Program. And this program started back in 2002 here in the Chesapeake Bay. So I work in the Chesapeake Bay region, but we also have 6 other regions around the country: New England, Gulf of Mexico, California, Pacific Northwest, Hawaii, and the Great Lakes. And so we're kind of all over the place at this point. And I've been out here since 2003. And my first grant cycle with NOAA BWET was actually Earth Force's first grant cycle with NOAA BWET back in 2003. And initially, we worked with Earth Force to do teacher professional development, and we worked with them consistently on various professional development projects until about 2009. And at the time, we both had our own frameworks, right? Like, we are not youth-led, or we're not youth-led back in 2002, 2003. Ours was the Meaningful Watershed Educational Experience, or the MIWE, and theirs was the Earth Force model. Both models were really based on those best practices and the disciplines that we were coming from, but they were a little bit different. We were science and environmental education. They were youth engagement and action. Both wonderful things to be working towards, but a little bit different. So while there were synergies, there were also differences, which led, as you can imagine, to many really interesting conversations. We tried to convince them to use our model. They tried to convince us to use their model, but in like this really congenial sort of way. And fast forward many, many grants and many, many more wonderful conversations with a lot of the leaders and staff members over at Earth Force, and our ways of thinking have really converged. And our partnership has resulted in Earth Force receiving over $2 million to do their environmental education projects and programming. So that's how I fit into the equation.
Wow, Shannon, that's a great story. I mean, the beauty of the science coming out of NOAA intersecting with Earth Force, that's got to be a powerful, powerful combination. And I'm going to ask this question one more time. Brian, how did you first get involved with Earth Force?
A few years later than Shannon and Tamar, in about 2008. And we entered into a relationship because we were both trying to build a movement to bring civics back into schools, but not the old boring civics class that kids fell asleep in, the one where young people become awakened to their own power and voice and ability to be community problem solvers. And so at that time in 2008, we were just looking for like-minded folks doing this work who saw the magic happen in schools and with young people when you let them really try to figure out how to improve their community. You get sort of, I call it the triple change, your triple bottom line of young people develop their own civic identities and develop socially and emotionally. The community improves. And then you see holistic improvements actually in their grades and their performance in school and their relationships. So we formed the National Action Civics Collaborative with Earth Force back in 2008 to bring civics, what we call action civics, back to schools, because it really was never fully in schools. Although John Dewey, you could argue, talked a little bit about action civics. So, it's just Earth Force team from Vince to Lisa Bardwell before have just always been the nicest, best collaborators that we've ever worked with. And I was at McFadden Challenge when we did this before, and they're kind of the glue. They help keep this little movement together.
Well, that's great, Brian. Thank you. I'm going to jump to another question. This one, Martha, I'll ask you to take it first, but how has your work intersected with Earth Force's work?
Sure. Thanks, John. My story is not that much different from Shannon's, I think. I've been doing environmental education for 40 years. I've always been interested in helping learners build skills to be engaged in problem solving. But I didn't really get a chance to work closely with Earth Force until about 4 years ago, when I proposed to work on a non-formal environmental education program with the North American Association for Environmental Education. And we wanted the goal of this program to be solving problems in your community related to the environment. And as we looked at all the different models that were out there, it seemed like Earth Force had the most coherent and best story to tell and an ability to convey that message to educators. And the Earth Force staff were so generous at saying, sure, use our model, make it work for you. And we'll even tell you what we think is the most critical pieces to be part of your new program. Because in our case, we're thinking 4-H clubs, scout groups, They may meet once a month, they may meet once a week, but they surely don't have as much time as classrooms have to dedicate to a project like this. So we had to slim down the model and make it, well, our pilot tester kids said, don't make it sound like school. So we had to make it a little bit more fun if we could. And we couldn't give them homework. We called it missions. They had missions to accomplish each week rather than homework. So we just sort of grew with it and took the Earth Force model and created CAPE, which we're saying is Community Action Projects for the Environment. And it's really just a slimmed down version of Earth Force, but it's easy enough for scout groups and leaders and 4-H club volunteers to say, oh, well, maybe I can do this. And so that's where we are.
All right. Thanks, Martha. Brian, you want to take that question? How has your work intersected with Earth Force's work?
Yeah, when I was at MCFA Challenge guiding that organization, I think the key, you would find a lot of groups that wanted to work with schools, but to be frank, a lot of them didn't know how. Because the key, I think, to working in schools is coming in and listening to teachers, listening to students, and having a nimble enough model that you can supply what teachers and students need. You're not coming in with a fixed model and we know the answers. And so Earth Force has been one of those groups for 30 years that has core principles, has a core methodology, but it responds to the local need. And so I think what we've done with Earth Force over the years is just build up a movement nationally to provide teachers and school systems with the resources and the professional development, the support and the encouragement. Sometimes it's cheerleading at times is what's needed. And sometimes it's getting to the administration and getting them on board. And sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's special events. But Earth First is just one of the few groups that knows how to do this well, and has the humility to kind of come into school districts, which are kind of like their own countries in some ways. They have their own culture and language and modalities, but Earth Force knows how to come in and work with communities and school districts in this humble, empowering way. And so that's where we've intersected.
Awesome. I just got to say, I got a call back in about 2003 from Julie Schultz. Lieb just put a shout out to all the former staff folks. I don't know if any of y'all know Julie or not, but I got a call from her, and the next thing I knew, I was in a creek somewhere with kick nets, waders, and about, 65, 70, ninth graders working in the creek collecting data. So it's just great the way that Earth Force is modeled. And Martha, you mentioned it. Hey, how did it work for you? And the way that Shannon, you said, I think everybody to some degree has taken science and civics and put it together to get these kids engaged in their communities, driving good things in their communities. So, all right, I'm going to jump on down to the next question. And Yolanda, I want to ask you this question. What impact does a program like Earth Force have on a community?
Well, first, let me say, listen to you all. I'm definitely the benefactor. Me and my students, we've been the benefactor of all of your efforts in building the capacity with the Earth Force program. But the greatest impact it had for the group of students I work with most recently was that these students were deemed trouble. And these students, who would have known that they would have identified an issue within their own community that would provide their siblings with a safe play space in which they could grow and nourish. And these students not only stuck with this for over 5 years, these students had the passion and the capacity to do the research, get the funding for a nature play space, and overcome tons of obstacles while maintaining a heavy caseload, because previously they've been identified as troublemakers. So did they have some catching up to do? Yes, they did. But rooting their efforts in the community on an initiative that inspired everyone around them and gave them a purpose and a long-lasting focus drove them to higher heights. These students not only focused on the community, they focused on their siblings, and they were awarded a nature play space. And they were hit with COVID. They were hit with, in the midst of COVID, these students had to get it together and say, we're going to stick with this. And in the midst of COVID, they wore masks and they came out under this civic engagement initiative to empower their community. And this year, May 2023, these students who are now juniors returned to their elementary school for the ribbon cutting ceremony. So for me, as an educator, that was the most inspiring moments of my life, knowing that you can never, ever give up on a child. You never know their talents or possibilities until you give them some. You give them an opportunity. And these students were really the bad ones. And they took it and they just ran with it. And yeah. So for me, what Earth Force did for me in this community, it has inspired the adults to come out because they now have a natural environment in which they once played in themselves to take their grandchildren to. And it's in the middle of their community. They don't have to travel 2-3 hours away. No, it's right up the street. So for this community, it brought more community stability. I could say that.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. Thank you for that, Yolanda. And just what you said and the impact it had on those individual students. That's powerful because we know if we want to change our communities, we got to do it one person at a time, one child at a time. So, Tamar, I would like to ask you the same question about the impact on the community. You were maybe looking at a 60,000 foot view. And so from your perspective, how have you seen Earth Force's work over the time that you were engaged or been engaged? How have you seen it impact communities?
Well, I will harken back to another memory. This was the launch of Earth Force in Orlando with the first CEO, a gentleman named Roy Gamsey. And we brought in kids who had been involved in all those groups that I mentioned earlier. So they were from all different parts of the country. And we were at Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando. And Al Gore, who was vice president at the time, showed up to help launch this thing. And what I've seen, from a distance in the years since then, is that there's not only, a unique sort of imprint in each community that really follows the norms and culture of that particular community, so it's an adaptable model, I think, in that way, and also a lot of cross-fertilization of learning from other people who are working in other places and bringing those ideas forward. So it's I think it's been a tremendous evolution over the years. I mean, I'm feeling my age, thinking 30 years ago was when we started, but I think it's also been it's been nice to see it evolve into much more. It's always been about civic action, but and evolved to be much more partnership based. And I think that was the spirit of it from the very beginning. The kids' idea of a big umbrella we could all be under.
All right. Thanks, Tamar. I love that idea that it was driven by youth to begin with. I mean, what a powerful, powerful model for change in our, they're not only making change in their community today, but they're learning how to make change and stay engaged throughout their lives. I'm going to jump on to the next question. And Yolanda, I'd like you to take this one first. But what advice would you give to educators, community leaders, or young people who are interested in this type of learning, what Earth Force calls the environmental action civics?
Well, for educators, I would definitely say, listen to the voices of your students. Again, the students drove everything they did. I mean, start to finish. It was Miss Pender-Bey, do this. Hey, let's do it. Let's do it. Even from the point of disappointments, stick with it. Stick with your students. Listen to your students. And I would tell the youth, you do have a voice. You have a voice, and this is your community. You are our future. I know it sounds cliche, but it's the truth. It's the truth. They are the future. And when these students spoke up, and they did, again, pushback after pushback. First, we couldn't build it on the campus because of liabilities. Then we couldn't get the funding. Then they had to do the lobbying for the aldermen in the neighborhood. And I mean, to see that in action is amazing. And so education goes beyond four walls. Our environment is huge. There's so much more learning outside of those four walls, and take it. And they'll take it and run with you. They'll educate you, as a matter of fact.
All right. Thank you, Yolanda. Brian, what about you? What advice would you give to educators, community leaders, folks that are interested in this environmental action civics?
Well, I laugh at times because we talk about all these crises happening with young people in silos, and I laugh because I want to cry. But there's a mental health crisis happening with young people. If you look at the data, it's depression and suicide have doubled. Some of it's social media and some of it's these micro causes, but some of it's common sense. The world is struggling. Climate change is scary for kids. Racial injustice is scary for kids. Economic inequality, our democracy on the brink. All these things are really hard on our kids' mental health, and they're hard in reality. And what I think Earth Force does by inviting young people to take action on that is it provides hope. It provides skills. It provides, sense that this democracy can function if people lean in thoughtfully, and it helps kids' mental health. So what I always implore teachers is you need these external partners, not just to educate kids, but to help them grow up in a healthy way, and have a positive sense of identity and believe in their country, that this democratic experiment can work. So get involved in Earth Force and realize there should be no wall between the school and the community. The community is the classroom and vice versa. And groups like Earth Force have been showing us that for 30 years, so we don't have to make it up from scratch.
And I'm just going to piggyback a little bit on what Brian said about the skills. It does empower our youth to push themselves beyond their self-perceived limitations. And it does empower them to address some of the social ills that impact our community. And they realize that it starts at home. If you can do this in your community, outside your community, the opportunities are endless. And that is a big gift to students, especially as they go through these bouts of depression and challenges and that whole period of isolation, just rejoining, the outside world again. So yeah, it definitely empowers students to look at possibilities. So yeah.
All right, thank y'all. I want to ask that same question. I'm not gonna call on anybody except for Martha and Shannon, and just y'all sort of have this science perspective. But what kind of advice would you give to an educator, to community leaders on engaging with Earth Force around their environmental civics model, environmental civic action model?
It's kind of tricky, because I was in the room when some of our kids spoke at a public hearing. They had their 3 minutes all nailed down. They were coherent, articulate. They were beautiful. The exciting thing was that the people who spoke after those kids said, listen to those kids. They've got it right. So the kids felt like they were being rewarded and acknowledged by the rest of the community, which was just so beautiful. But I also think it's possible that if any one thing isn't perfectly accurate, that kids say, somebody's going to pounce on it. And somebody's going to say, oh, well, those kids don't know anything. Look, they made this mistake. And that's really horrible, but it happens. And it means that we really have to, I think it means if kids can practice their little spiel with resource people and with partners and with other people who know the issues in their community, get those things fixed and corrected early on, then they can feel comfortable that they actually have all the information down pat. And nobody's going to say, oh, you got it wrong. For the community resource people, I would say, help kids get it right. Teach them the background information they need. They're not stupid. They're passionate. And they can use that passion to make a difference in the community. But they need the help of the experts so that other people listen to them.
All right. Thank you, Martha. And Shannon, would you have anything to add to that advice that you would give to educators, community leaders, or young people as they consider this type of learning, the environmental action civics?
Yeah, so I just resonated a lot with what Brian said in that giving students the ability to create change really has them thinking about the climate crisis in a different sort of way. It gives them the solutions that they need and the ability for them to understand that they can create the change that they want to see in the world. And that is so important for students. So making sure that we build that opportunity for students to take action. I mean, science education without application is boring, and so connecting the science and social studies and action and all those pieces together create this wonderful learning opportunity for students that then show them what they can do. And I think that is really important. And that's why in science education, we often think about how do we connect with social studies? How do we do this multidisciplinary learning unit and not just stick within our discipline strictly?
All right. I love that. Yeah. Science. Well, I'm not going to say science education is boring, but, science education with civics is incredibly powerful in our communities. As Yolanda just, that story just, I think Vince said it brought a tear to his eye. It brought a tear to mine as well. And so, that's just an incredibly powerful impact of this program, of these young people engaging in civics and doing something that they want to do, something that they've come up with as a result of engaging with the community leaders, engaging with the community experts. So anyway, thank you all for those responses. Looking back over the last 30 years, what do you think Earth Force has added to civic and environmental education? And Martha, would you take that one?
Sure. I think there have been a lot of programs that have said kids need to take their information and turn it into action. And when kids do that, in my experience at least, they tend to think about, how do I get other people to do what I have learned to do? How do I educate others to ride bicycles or recycle? Or I'm going to put up a poster at the grocery store so people will remember to bring their bags. They think about making change in ways that they have personally made change. And what Earth Force is suggesting is to move from that individual action to a community action. And that's different for some kids to think about. And once they do that, all sorts of questions have to come up. When they take the Earth Force suggestion that the project be related to asking for change, asking a decision maker to make a change, then kids have to say, well, who's the decision maker? And what decisions have been made in our community about this issue? And what are the regulations about this issue that affect our community? And that's civic education. And so when the kids start asking those questions, they want to know the answers. And that carries them into this new world of collective efficacy, of being powerful at making change at the community level. And that's really different than what they've perhaps have done ever before. So they learn a lot, and that helps them feel good about what they're doing. So I think that's what Earth Force has done. They've moved the discussion from individual to collective at the community level. They've helped engage with civic education by asking the kids to ask a decision maker to make a change in policy, in practice, in whatever it is. That's different. Kids will tend to think about eco-management kinds of changes. Oh, let's plant trees, or let's pick up the garbage in the stream. All those things are good to do, but it isn't the same as civic education and collective action. And I think that's what Earth Force brings to the whole environmental education, science education, civic education world.
All right. Thank you, Martha. And Shannon, I wanted to ask you that question as well. And one of the questions, and I really want this to be kind of an open-ended question, but the question revolves around, what Earth Force's activities have added to civic and environmental education. And I want you to answer that question, Shannon, but I want everybody just to kind of think about, well, what has Earth Force taught you as an educator? Is there something that, one project that you had, or one student that you had that taught you something as an educator? So Martha, if you want to, Shannon, if you want to take a shot at that, how's it changed civic and environmental education?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you brought that lens to it, because I am a policy person at a government agency, right? But I'm also an environmental education professional that's been here doing this for 20 years. And I was really going to answer this question a little more programmatically, and that is what it brought to me, right, as an educator. So NOAA BWET, like I said, it's one of the largest funders of environmental education in the country, a little bit less than $10 million a year going out the door. So when you influence NOAA BWET, you're going to influence all of our grantees and all of those people that participate in our trainings and programs. So it's a big multiplier effect, right? And I can say for sure that Vince and Earth Force in general have had a really big influence on the program of BWET, not just here in the Chesapeake where I work, but nationwide. So like I said earlier, we have the MWE, the Meaningful Watershed Educational Experience. Back in the day, it used to just have these preparation, action, reflection pieces. It says action, but it didn't really mean action, right? It meant kids going outside, making observations, or like planting a tree here or there with no connection to what they were learning. It wasn't about taking informed action to address a problem or issue. They're really disconnected. And so when we opened up the definition and started thinking about what should we do it differently, kind of moving forward, in the early 2010s, Earth Force was at the table, right? They were at the table advocating for us to think about youth action, and in kind of a different sort of way than we have, pointing out that when you say action, you don't mean action. It's like, yeah, we say action, like you don't mean action, right? And so not only were they thinking about pushing us to think about action as a culmination of the project, but also encouraging us to think broadly about actions beyond planting trees or stewardship actions that can fit in a civic bucket, talking to your local leaders, things like that. So when the new definition was released in 2014 for the Chesapeake and then rolled out to the country, there were 4 elements instead of 3 elements. And one was this informed action piece with civic engagement as one of our buckets, like I said. And now every BWET program that is funded across the country every single year uses that framework that includes what EarthForce brought to the conversation. Then in 2017, Vince took things a step further through a BWET grant to ask, well, how's that action thing going, right? Like, how are those grantees doing with their action projects? And spoiler alert, they weren't doing all that well with the action component of their meaningful watershed educational experience. So again, through his conversations with our grantees and kind of prodding them about how are things going, what are your barriers, what are those opportunities, they really gave us insights that allowed us to better understand kind of what were those barriers to getting to those action projects, and then encouraging us to convene more conversations, create the trainings that we need, and get people closer and closer to that youth-directed action that is linked to the problem that they were studying. So I can really say programmatically, and for me as a professional, that EarthForce has been a thought partner with us for a very long time, and they've really changed the work that we do.
All right. Thank you, Shannon. Tamar, you're seeing this again from a much higher level perspective as a funder. How do you think that EarthForce has changed civics and environmental action for youth?
I like to think that it was a pioneer and continues to be a pioneer and an innovator in really centering children and youth in particular, as decision makers and drivers of action, with the organization sort of facilitating that process. But I look at it across the sort of youth development landscape, if you will, and many of the traditional programs, as well as others that have come along more recently, are a little bit more adult driven in terms of what they're going to be working on and how they're going to get that done. And I think really the training that EarthForce provides youth in terms of being responsible citizens in a democracy and taking responsibility for solving the problems that they see in their communities is just a really very powerful mandate, and I think it really gives me hope for the future. I also think seeing it evolve over the years. I mean, keep in mind we were almost pre-internet when we started. Email was kind of new, just on the horizon. I remember at the same time at the Pew Charitable Trust, at the same time we were forming EarthForce, we were having a debate about whether or not we should have a website. So, that's how long ago that was. And I think EarthForce has helped really drive, in many ways, lead the civic and environmental education movement since then, again, centering the youth.
Right. Thank you for that, Tamar. I want to ask this you brought up the website. And I really want to ask just kind of an open question for anybody, but how have students utilized technology in the EarthForce programs? I mean, we know that technology is just, it's just ubiquitous in our lives these days, but how have students utilized technology in and through the EarthForce program in y'all's experience? And I'm gonna leave it open. Who wants to take that one? Martha has a big smile. I knew it was coming.
So I can just get the ball rolling here by saying these kids know a lot more about technology than I do. And when they come up with a question, they ask ChatGPT, and that the computer gives them an answer. May not be the best answer, but it gives them a place to start. And so the questions I was saying before that they were asking, well, who's the decision maker? What are the regulations in our community that govern this issue? ChatGPT can help them, and kids automatically just go to their phones and ask the question. And that's technology helping.
Wow. Yeah. Brian, you look like you got a story there.
Well, I think action civics has changed pretty radically because of technology, but it's not a cure all or end all. But young people are taking in their information from very, very different sources than we did growing up, and that means that they're organizing, and their collective voice and power is on different channels and mediums like TikTok or different social media platforms or group texts or various things. And so I think Earth Force's process is a pretty elegantly simple 5-step process that technology can plug into every single step. But I think Earth Force appeals to young people because it's made, what I admire too about Earth, it's made courageous decisions. It's a lot easier to teach just service and individual acts of service around environment. It's a lot easier to stay just in the science bucket and not really bring in civics. It's a lot easier just to talk about civics and not action civics, which has been banned in multiple states along with critical race theory. But at each of these sort of critical moments, I think Earth Force has taken the courageous stand, like, oh no, science, environmental action civics is not a paradox. They go together. And I think that's what's appealing about the model. What gives it power is it cuts through these silos into really what we're after with young people and with protecting our environment and our Earth. And kids get that. Kids have phoniness detectors in them. And if you're phony, they pick it up pretty quick. And I think they like Earth Force because it's authentic, it's real, and it gets to the heart of the matter of what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And I'm a scientist myself, and I'm thinking somebody's going to talk about spreadsheets and Excel spreadsheets and data and, but Shannon, how has technology been used by some of the programs that you've been working with? I mean, you've got a history of, I think, developing those programs within NOAA and implementing them over time and changing them. How has technology, been used by the students?
Yeah, well, it's changed over time, right? So I can remember the day when we had many, many, many conversations about, like, do we allow them to have technology outside? Is that taking away from their outdoor experience and absorbing what the mindfulness exercises and things that we need them to feel about the environment in order to care about the environment, right? And so those were some of the early conversations. And then we quickly realized that we didn't really have a choice. So we had to get on board, right? And there are spreadsheets and things like that go into the science education, and they're collecting their data and they're putting it into the spreadsheets and, doing their math and coming up with their, all of the things that are telling them the science and their claims, action, and reasoning, and all those sorts of things are happening. But they're also, using crowdsourced data about what they're seeing outside. So there's many, 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 I keep saying many, 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 but there are lots of different citizen science programs out there that use technology, and you can snap a picture. It'll tell you what critter you're looking at, what tree you're looking at, what flower you're looking at. So they're using those sorts of things to gather information really quickly about what they're observing, what phenomenon they're observing, those sorts of things. And so I think that's one of the ways that they're using it. But again, I agree with what's been said. They're also using it for that outreach piece, right? I have a couple of teens myself, and they are out there asking surveys on whatever platform they're using in the moment, right? It used to be Facebook, then it was Insta, then it was Snap, then it's whatever. But they're out there on social media asking questions, gathering data from their friends about their perceptions and things like that. And then as they figure out what sort of action they want to take, they're saying, show up at my planting, show up at this rally that we've put together, show up at whatever these things are. And so that, again, I agree, they're used at every single point in the traditional science, but then also it's their way of shouting it from the rooftops, I think, is social media.
All right, great. And we got a question from the audience, and Yolanda, I'd like you to answer this question, and then we can maybe go around a little bit on it. But what do you think's necessary for this environmental action civics movement to keep going, and importantly, to keep growing?
Oh, okay. So I looked at the comment about the parent. Parent engagement is important. It was one of the driving forces with the students I work with, because just to have that acknowledgement. Remember, I was working with a core group of students who were not really celebrated. And so to have that support was amazing. But I also believe in making it inclusive, because everyone in the community plays a role. And so having that inclusivity is what continues to keep this nature play space alive and vibrant. There's a core group of parents who comes out and makes sure it's maintained and restocked with different pieces of wood. So one of the things I would definitely say is inclusivity drives it, keeps it going.
All right. Well, that's a great response to finish up on. I think that, one, thank you guys all for coming and participating in this. I've just been re-inspired, as I'm sure our audience has. Hopefully you have as well. And actually, I guess got one more question I'm going to get in there. I jumped the gun. I'm sorry. And Brian, I'm going to get this for you. But from your experience with Earth Force, what lessons have you personally learned about inspiring and educating young people to become active environmental citizens?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I want to just echo Marilyn, because I think she's on to something with parental involvement. I think we need to fight for this type of civic education to be in our schools, and parents need to be leading that effort, and then also working with their young people to get involved. I think inspiring young people is what Yolanda has been talking about. I just have seen thousands and thousands of young people get activated by this process. And it often is the kid that we label as the problem kid or the trouble kid. And the real issue is their only problem is they don't learn in the way that a classroom structure is constructed. They actually learn by doing, or they learn by experiencing, or they have a creativity as their superpower. And so individual self-empowerment is inextricably, in my mind, linked to community empowerment and to environmental change and justice, because it's all one biosphere, right? And so I think when we start talking about healing our earth, it also is about, when you heal the young person, and heal the earth comes along too. So young people get it. And I think the number one thing is the power of invitation. And, last thing I'll say too is external partners are really needed in schools. Teachers are lonely, kids are lonely, they're all overwhelmed. And it's, Dina Mitra, who's a researcher at Penn State, has shown that if you don't have these external partners like Earth Force helping school systems and teachers, these programs, the civic program fades away. It just dies from exhaustion and a lack of support. And so we need Earth Force to grow. We need Earth Force replicants. We need this times 100 in coming years. So I'm hoping the next 30 years of Earth Force is even bigger and better than the excellent first 30 years.
All right. Thank you, Brian. And Martha, you want to take a shot at that question?
Sure. And I'll also go, like Brian, to go back to Marilyn's question. Yes, parents are key to this. And I've also become familiar with a community in North Carolina that has a youth council as a part of their governance structure. I'm sure they're not the only town in the United States that has a youth council, and probably Earth Force staff know about a lot other ones. But what a great idea. And so one thing communities could do is sort of institutionalize a process of listening to youth and helping give them an avenue to make their voices heard more easily. And that could be a great thing for action civics. And then back to the question you asked me to respond to. In addition to the wonderful passion and vision that kids can offer, I think that one key thing is also the leader, the educator, the teacher, the whoever it is that's facilitating this process. They really have to have a sixth sense in some way to know when to listen and when to direct, or when to corral and when to free up the kids. I mean, it's not just one or the other totally. It's a dance. It's back and forth. Kids need suggestions. Kids need to run. It goes back and forth. And so knowing when to do what is really, really important. And knowing when to ask for the support that they need. There's resources in communities. There's organizations that have worked on many of the issues that kids want to talk about. And there's people, League of Women Voters, all sorts of groups out there that want to work with kids too. Kids can be a voice that create bridges between different factions of adults. They may not be able to see the connection, but kids can say, hey, this is an important process, an important problem to solve. Let's come together and think about what will make it better in our community. And sometimes adults need that wake-up moment from kids. So there's lots of opportunities and lots of things going on out there.
All right. Thank you, Martha. Vince?
John, it's good to see you. Thank you, John, for moderating this panel. I thought you did a fantastic job. So special thank you to you for stepping in for us.
I had great panelists.
You did indeed. You had great panelists. It was interesting listening to all of your comments. A lot because, as Brian kind of said, I think both organizationally and me personally, I'm kind of, I don't take compliments well. I kind of hide from them, to be honest with you. So hearing all these compliments, I think I texted one of my staff and I was like, it's great to hear this, but it's making me feel kind of creepy right now. So, so I totally appreciate that. But listening to all of you, it reminded me of how many thought partners have gone into making Earth Force work over the years. And Brian, for those of you that don't know, coined the phrase action civics, which we kind of stole and turned into environmental action civics. At some point, I'm going to send Brian an email and ask him if that's okay, but not today. Shannon has been with us, as she described early on and off, with a lot of back and forth conversations. And a lot of time spent trying to find this balance between environment and civics, and how we do things. And those conversations have been incredibly important to us. Yolanda's work in her community has been reflected back to us through our program people and our people that do teacher training, so that we get better at working in communities like Yolanda's. And so that's influenced our program. And perhaps most recently, when Martha talks about her CAPE program, where we worked with them and said, here's what we think is essential. And they came back to us with this great piece. And if you haven't looked it up, you should, of what they're doing, which has really taken a lot of stuff that we do and turned it into some really nice pieces of activities that have shortened the process in a couple of places. And I don't know, Martha, if you've looked, but we've taken some of that and incorporated it back in. And so Earth Force has been this living beast for years and years and years. And I think it, in some ways, and as much as I love you all, in some ways, I look back at Tamar and the team of people that she was working with, including Roy, who I think is listening in on this session, for setting that foundation, right, of what we wanted to be, right, that we wanted to be about young people being involved in civic action. And some of the young people, at least one of them that Tamar met with way back in the day, a young woman named Anna Brown, who now has 2 kids, is the vice chair of our board of directors all these years later. And so she's been a part, as well as some other people that have been a part. And so that's kind of my reflection back to you guys, as it were. This has been really humbling and rewarding to hear from all of you, and the fantastic stuff that you had to say, not just about us, but about this work in general, which we think is just so vitally important to get young people involved in their communities, taking civic action, to learn about the civic system as it exists, not something in a textbook or somewhere else. And so what you all have added to that has been incredibly important to us, and to me in particular, but to the entire organization. And so thank you all for your contributions to what has made Earth Force hopefully what we believe is a very successful organization. So thank you. And thanks for taking the time today. I know you're all very busy, except for Martha, who's recently retired, and she's not very busy. But everybody else, I know you're all very, very busy. So, but thank you all. Thanks for the time. For those of you that are out there watching, if you have questions, send them to us. If you want to join in November on our website, there will be a listing for an event, and we'll have some of the young people. So we're going to have some of the young people from that first group of people that met with Al Gore, all the way to young people that participated just recently. We're going to have them all together to talk about what that did for them, what influence that had on their lives. And so I'm excited to see that. Those are always, those are tear-jerking moments for me. So, Alyssa, I think we need applause. Can you still do applause?
Hey, Vince, just real quick, thank you for all your leadership over the years, and driving the train like you've been driving it, in and out sometimes, but mostly in. You've done a great job, and it's reflected in what's going on, what we just saw. So thank you.
Yeah, it made me feel old when Tamar said we were debating whether or not to have a website. I remember the first time I walked into the Earth Force office, and there was this huge fax machine and a copy machine. I don't even know what those things are anymore. All right, we're going to end this. Thank you all. Hope you have a great night. Thanks to everybody that joined in and participated or watched. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks to everybody. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.